Hello, and welcome to Assemblies of the World with me, Anna Isabel. And I'm delighted because today I have Marc Horn with me, who is responsible for founding the Peacekeepers. Hello, Marc.
Hi Anna, how are you? It's lovely to be here.
I'm so delighted because it's one of those things that we hear about, but many people don't know what the Peacekeepers are and what they're about. So people might think about, peacekeeping missions out in the Middle East or somewhere.
Well,
But
when we started, that's exactly what it was. You typed in peacekeepers and you only got the UN sort of peacekeepers.
so tell us about the Peacekeepers as you founded them.
Yeah. I mean, basically, my background is sort of contracting and contract law, so I'm very familiar with contract law, which means you've got to be very pedantic. And then I was in Kuwait on March the 12th, due to fly back on March the 14th when COVID hit. And I've done a lot of data analysis in my past and cycle theory, and I looked at the data and I thought, this is insane because they'd locked the country down. I was due to fly back 14th. And it's like, what's going on here? But basically, I was also involved with civil litigation over a flat uh, because we don't have a pension. So basically, the legal experience I had at the point, I've always had a strong social justice. And so basically, I really started going into social justice. And this starting point really is knowledge. It's about the search for truth. I've been down every rabbit hole imaginable uh, over the last 20 odd years, but got kicked off all the groups because I asked questions and I asked for evidence. And so the concept really is to educate people uh, on their rights and the relationship between those governing and the governed. So it's really educational, and from that, people can choose to do what they like with it. So pretty, it can be whatever you want to make out of it, but it's the foundation is educational, really.
Okay, so this is a kind of training in law.
Yeah, it's generally you'll find it's not that it's anything new that you don't know. It's just put into a different language. Innately, we know right from wrong, and that is called conscience. And so we know fair and just. All kids know this, all adults know this. And so, really, it's about just putting it into a different context, what we know in law. So,
You're right that it is innate, because I remember seeing footage of an experiment that was done with toddlers.
mm,
The toddlers came into a room, and there were sweets that were
mhm,
available to them.
yeah,
So that I can't remember. I think it was, those bubble gum
mm,
machine type thing. It was that type of thing where they could actually see them. And it was very interesting because as they came in, they were aware that one of the children didn't actually have any
mm,
in his. And it was really interesting because the others didn't weren't happy about that. They didn't quite know what to do about it, some of them.
that,
Others thought, okay, I'm going to share mine. But what was
mm,
very clear is that they all knew that that wasn't fair. And I
yeah,
think this comes back to natural law. You're talking about a
yeah,
conscience, something that's innate. The reason that natural law appeals is actually because we have that sense of fairness, and some would say justice. We know what's right and what's wrong. And
absolutely.
So there is that.
Mm,
So when we can see injustice happening in our world
mm.
and we don't know what to do about it,
Yeah,
it doesn't mean that we don't know that it exists. We know it exists.
absolutely.
We just don't
Absolutely.
know what the recourse is. So
Yeah.
what the peacekeepers are offering then is the language by which we might be able to understand law better and then be able to do something about that. Is that
Yeah, yeah. I mean, basically, the reason for the name Peacekeepers, okay, is because it's all clicked. Everything is about keeping the peace. That's why we're in society, to protect one another, to protect our property rights, and keeping the peace. And what people don't realize, keeping the peace is actually the social contract. Uh, that's the single reason we get together in society. So, in my research, I came across the Justice of Peace Act 1361. So this is nothing new, okay? And nothing I've got to say is new, all right? It's all there, it's all available. I just literally took a palette of paint and painted a different picture from what you innately know. So a breach of the peace, to be able to lawfully breach another's peace, you must have evidence of actual harm, intended harm, or reasonably foreseeable harm. Reasonable foreseeable harm is basically negligence law, so that you don't act negligently. And and that's what everything boils down to. So before, for instance, a police interaction or a council interaction or any interaction, they need lawful excuse to breach your peace. And then about, oh, it must be about 7, 8 years ago, whilst I was working with a property and trust, I did a course with somebody in London. And one of the chaps mentioned this thing called the Senior Courts Act, Section 49, which says the rules of equity prevail over the common law in the event of a conflict. So this totally affirms the supreme law of the land in the UK and most jurisdictions in the world is the rules of equity. And equity is invoked when anything goes against the conscience. They call it an unconscionable action, then remedy lies within equity.
what is equity then?
Equity is very simple. Equity will not suffer a wrong without a remedy. It's about fair and just. So anything which is not fair or not just. And it's about the search for truth. And I would put it as the best wording we have for natural justice as it pertains to human behavior. Okay. So I'm not talking here about scientific laws, but the rules of equity are in effect scientific, derived from over the last, well, it goes back to, however far back you want to go. We mentioned innately we know what's right or wrong. And so in essence, you can call it karma, you can call it whatever, to me, it's all energies. When somebody does a wrong, they will provide, a remedy will come. We just don't know how, we don't know when. Okay, so karma, same thing. You don't know when it's going to come kick you in the backside or not. So equity really summed up is equity will not suffer a wrong without a remedy. Equity is invoked when something's unconscionable, i.e. something goes against our conscience. Our conscience is what is the universal connector of humanity as to what is right and wrong and what is fair and just. And that there really is the summary of equity. Well, other parts of equity that are important is equity aids the vigilant and not the indolent. So what that means is basically, if you want equity, then get off your backside and do something. And really, equity is once you have the knowledge to get a remedy, provided you have the evidence to breach that other person's peace of actual harm, intended harm, or reasonably foreseeable harm, the courts must provide remedy in equity if the common law does not provide suitable remedy. And this was settled in 1615, so again, very old. And the rules of equity prevail over the common law in the event of a conflict. And we live in a common law precedent jurisdiction, which means lower courts must follow higher courts. And as this was actually in the king's, right at the top level of the courts at the time, that means quite simply every single court we go into, every justice, every judge is bound by the rules of equity. So in theory, it's simple.
So why are we in such a mess of, well, injustice, unfairness, attacks on our humanity and our world without there being any redress whatsoever?
Okay. Human nature, quite simply. My mother hated it when I came, well, she still hates it when I say this, but basically human nature is to do as little as possible for as much as possible. So every single person could do more to help themselves or help others, but most people, in the real world, we have to provide, which means we have to go out to work, into the rat race, all of that. I've been there, done that. Fortunately, I'm out of that pretty much. But because we do as little as possible for as much as possible, and that's a very blanket statement, but I've not seen anybody where it doesn't apply to, because it's doing as much as possible. We can always do more for ourselves and we can always do more for others. But like I say, it's human nature. And then I'm sure people are very familiar with the saying, it takes a few good men to do nothing for tyranny to prevail. So again, going back to the energy, you can't create or destroy energy. It just gets transmuted and everything's a reflection and it always needs to be in balance. So if it takes a few good people to do nothing for tyranny to prevail, i.e. if we're living too many of us too much in the material realm, then the mirror image of that simply means it takes a few good people to do something for tyranny to fail. And that's the philosophy and the ethos behind what we're doing, is by applying knowledge. The system is actually fair and just. The problem is not the system. It's basically people are not doing their jobs properly in the judiciary and the whole legal profession. So this goes from top to bottom. And we need to accept that we actually have caused this problem ourselves. We can only blame ourselves. We could have done something. We've turned a blind eye when we know something's been wrong. That there has allowed the breach of peace, because when we see something wrong, we actually are failing in our social obligation to keep the peace by allowing somebody else to do harm, or it's reasonably foreseeable they'll do harm. So once we start to accept that we actually are the biggest part of the problem, and accept that the judiciary, the legal professional, the politicians, the whole katuti, they're just doing as little as possible. They're nothing more than bullies. Bullies will take a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more, and we just need to learn to draw the line. And then that's why I say it takes a few good people to do something for tyranny to fail. And that is what the Peacekeepers are trying to address. Get the knowledge. Knowledge builds confidence. Confidence builds courage. And then when people are courageous enough to stand up, and now after 2 years, we've learned a huge amount. And I had my liability order turned over 2 days ago in the magistrates' court for the simple reason the 3 magistrates and legal advisor were not doing their job. The court auditor course that we've got sets out what their job is, and all you need is the tick sheet. And if they're not doing their job, then you can get the order turned over, i.e. accountability. So it's about holding people to account where they are either intentionally or unintentionally causing others harm. And it's not it's not corruption, because to me corruption is centrally organized. It's purely they do what's easiest, and that's human nature. So there's something called the observer effect. I don't know if people have heard of the dual slit experiment over 100 years ago, but basically the observer effect changes behavior. So we're encouraging people to just go and sit in the public gallery, watch justice being done in your name. And if that doesn't get your energies up and get you to go and, really, okay, and do something about it, but it doesn't take that many. I'm convinced with, 1,000 good people that know what they're doing, regularly going to the courts, holding people to account, and all of a sudden it'll all change.
There's quite a lot in what you've just said, and I guess you kind of answered my next question, which is there for people, this seems to be an insurmountable obstacle because from their perspective, the system is rigged. And it's a bit like the gambling houses, the house always wins. And
well, I've just proven last week that it's not rigged. Yeah. In the magistrates' court, the 3 magistrates and the order was turned over by a district judge in the magistrates' court. Why? He had no choice. I had the evidence to show that the magistrates were not acting lawfully, that the legal advisor was not acting lawfully, i.e. they weren't doing their jobs properly. He had no choice but to set aside the liability order.
And that's the important thing, is that even if we feel that the power is against us, we need to start believing otherwise, because it's by otherwise that we can actually take on the injustices and begin to challenge them and turn them over. So I think that that's very interesting, because that brings us back to the course that the Peacekeepers run. So tell us about the course. How is it set up? Do people have to go to classes?
It's a free online course. As long as I can afford it, it's going to be free. It starts off teaching you about the self, there's a lot of different rabbit holes. I'm just going to call them all rabbit holes, okay? Sovereignty actually is a particular feature of a state. So people aren't sovereign. It's a concept which is applied to a state. However, people, if we apply logic and reason and observation, it's self-evident that unless somebody can bring the creator, whatever that is, to whoever, call them what you like, energy, karma, God, Allah, whatever people want to call it, that's between you and your creator. Okay. But if you think you can tell somebody else what to do and impose your will lawfully, then you need to bring the creator into court to give first-hand testimony that, for instance, 650 MPs can tell 67 million or whatever the population is, people what to do. That really is how simple it is. Because that's not possible, or we've not found a way of doing that yet, it means simply nobody can impose their will on another person. That means every interaction with another person, my rights end where your rights start. Therefore, we need to negotiate every interaction from when we start stepping on other people's rights. So you're free to do whatever you like on your own. However, once you step onto another's rights, interaction must be consensual. Because if it's not consensual, then somebody's imposing their will on the other. So that means that we all equal under the law. We all must be equal under the law because nobody can prove otherwise. And nobody's above the law. So that there is critical for people to understand. So together with the breach of peace, which is the key, before anybody can impose on another, they must have evidence of the other having caused harm or intending to cause harm. So that's the basis of where the course is coming from. So from that, basically, it starts off with your mind is in control of your body, and you are therefore liable for any harm you cause. What you do with your body is your choice. Nobody can interfere with what you do with your body, and that's well established in law. So when you think about what happened with, forced vaccinations, wearing nappies on your face, all of this sort of stuff, nobody has a right to impose that on you. However, the reason that it's happening, okay, there's lots of psychological reasons for it. But essentially, the problem, and I've started a law course because I can't understand why the legal professionals don't get it. But having just finished the public law module, I fully understand why they don't get it. They are not taught fundamental law. So what they're doing is getting people to believe that statutes are law. Now, again, 1610, in the case of proclamations, it was settled. There are three types of law in England: common law, custom, and statute law. And then if you look at the structure of those governing, that there is basically those governing today derived their authority from the Bill of Rights 1688 and the Coronation Oath Act 1688. So it's a fight basically between what law is supreme. And with the case of proclamations, they merely said three types of law exist. What was also agreed was that the royal prerogative derives its authority from the law of the land, and the law of the land is defined in the Confirmation of Charters 1297 as the common law. So now with that, we can start to build a hierarchy. And the Coronation Oath Act, in the first promise, King Charles took this last year. I promise to govern the people according to their respective laws and customs. And it's been slightly modified from the Coronation Oath Act, but the Coronation Oath Act is explicit, using statutes in Parliament agreed upon, i.e. it sets out the relationship between those governing and the governed. So with that, it makes it clear statutes are merely company policy for the delivery of the people's laws and customs. They do what we tell them. We create the law. That's called common law. And the way that we create the law is by going to the court and setting what's called a precedent. However, whilst we leave this up to the legal professionals who really don't know what's going on, you get bad precedents. So in summary, that there is the whole course. By applying the rules of equity, where there's a bad common law precedent, you and I, it should in theory only take one person to change the whole system. And so the course is structured basically around that, how you can empower yourself to stand up and when you see an injustice, to do something, even if it's just basically collecting evidence. But turning a blind eye, people need to stop doing.
So the course itself equips people to understand the law.
Yeah.
And to be able to, I don't want to say negotiate, but find their way around.
Challenge authority.
Yes,
And
challenge it.
by authority, anybody that's trying to impose their will on you. And when you know your rights, then you'll start to understand the relationship, because everything comes down to relationships. And people, there's a fundamental thing in law: he who asserts must prove. So if you're claiming rights, you have to prove them. However, by changing it slightly, if you know their duties to uphold your rights, you simply need to, and it's very easy to evidence breaches of their duties to uphold your rights. So again, by just simply changing the mindset slightly, you again empowering yourself.
So people in public office, do they swear an oath also? We heard about this, the king swearing an oath, which really says that he is there to basically look after the laws of his people.
Yeah.
This is common law.
Yeah.
What about other holders of office?
Right. Basically, lawful governance is derived from the first promise of the Coronation Oath Act, and that is to govern us according to our laws and customs. And we create law either in private. You and I actually have created the law here. We have an agreement, we have consent, and therefore it's enforceable. If there's consideration, you can enforce it in a court. So we create our law, and when we have misunderstandings, we resolve that in a public dispute resolution system. And that there's the second promise, the the independent judiciary. So the king's job is, firstly, to govern us according to our laws, and secondly, provide us the place to make our laws, which is an independent judiciary. So those are the only two things of relevance. The church are of no interest in that. But the first two promises are it. Now, what happens is, obviously, the king can't be in every court. The king can't be on every street, every town, and that. Therefore, he delegates the authority. So you get the senior public officers swear allegiance to the monarch, and take, for instance, in the judiciary, they take a judicial oath. And MPs and government ministers and senior office holders take an oath of office. All of the oaths include to uphold the law. And therefore, in theory, there's a straight chain of command. So the judges all take the same judicial oath, and that includes lay magistrates, and therefore all of them should be doing the same job to uphold the rule of law, which is what's called a constitutional principle, which was established 1,000 years ago. I mean, basically, Magna Carta 1215 is the modern document, even though it's not valid. However, it establishes the rule of law as the primary constitutional principle, because at the time, the monarch was head of the legislature, head of the executive, as well as head of the judiciary, i.e. royal prerogative contained all powers to govern. So that there's the primary constitutional principle, and Parliament even agrees with that. In 2005, Parliament confirmed the primary constitutional principle as the rule of law in the Constitutional Reform Act 2005. However, it needs reminding and needs forcing the people to do that.
You said that Magna Carta is not valid. Can you explain what that means?
Okay. Magna Carta, and basically when people are, when I say not valid, Magna Carta 1297 is valid. Magna Carta 1215 is the one that people talk about. So Magna Carta 1215, basically equity is substance over form. Let me just explain that first, and then I'll come back to Magna Carta 1215. So in substance, you get a speeding fine. What is it that they believe? Okay. They believe, because there's a statutory law, that creates a right for them to take your money if you're speeding, then that's their belief. And that's what we need to challenge, because that's a wrong belief. Unless there's harm, there should be nothing. However, people are arguing, I'm not the birth certificate, I'm not the person, I'm, the judge is the trustee of my Sesta KV trust, all of these sort of things. In substance, what's going on? Okay. The court needs jurisdiction to be able to resolve the dispute. So the government pushes in a claim of their belief. It's only their belief. And then you've got people coming in with all of these rabbit holes. It doesn't work, because in substance, okay, and I include in there the living man, the living woman, a 5-year-old can see that. That's another example of substance. But basically, what they're saying is, was your mind in control of your body, which was in control of the thing traveling at that place, at that time, at that speed? Did you or didn't you? So that's the substance. So it's not whether you're a person, or whether you're a birth certificate, or whether it's a car or a conveyance or this, that, or the other. So that there's what's called form, the format. Okay. So whether they write your name in capital letters or small letters, it's totally irrelevant. It makes no difference. And with the substance, it's substantive matters. So hopefully people can see substance versus form with that example. So going back to Magna Carta, the substance has been retained in Magna Carta 1297. The substance really is the rule of law, the constitutional principle of the rule of law, as well as the right to trial by jury. These are substantive matters, but these here, because they were long-standing customs, statute cannot overrule it. So the substance of Magna Carta 1215 has been carried through. However, the vast majority of Magna Carta 1215 deals with, for instance, barons and when they die, the wives' inheritances and, you know, the kids getting the title and all of this stuff. It's irrelevant. It's of absolute no relevance. Today, we've moved on from the days of the barons. We moved through the feudal society where you have the lords were all of it. Now we are moving to, we are all equal under the law and nobody's above the law. So the other thing is, they understand Magna Carta 1297. This was recently reaffirmed in 2008. Magna Carta 1297 was one of the legal arguments used for trial by jury, that nobody can be deceased of their lands without trial by jury. And that was in the House of Lords, and therefore they understand this language. But if you start talking Magna Carta 1215, and the other thing that you need to bear in mind is the king was the fountain of everything in governance. So when the king died, guess what happens? The law dies with the king. A new king takes over. And so what the kings did was something called reconfirmation of the charters. And what they did was they would cherry pick, much like pick and mix sweets, what laws they want to start their reign with and what laws they don't. And the Bill of Rights, that's where that ended. And therefore, there's no reconfirmation of charters or anything like that anymore, because the current statute book is current, and Parliament is a fiction of law, not a king. Parliament has, it doesn't die. Therefore, the law is more consistent between different monarchs or different rulers. So Magna Carta 1297, they understand statute law. It is statute law and it is common law. And much statute law is actually common law. And much of that statute law is actually very equitable as well. So in theory, we actually have a very good system. Problem is practice.
So, I want to come back to the speeding ticket.
Yeah.
Because you said something that was very interesting. You said they believe that
it's a belief.
They have the right to impose that upon us. So what you're saying is, if I'm understanding correctly, that rather than trying to tackle the issue by saying, well, the person you're dealing with is not who I really am because I'm a free man, free woman. The thing to do is to challenge the belief that they have the right to impose that upon you in the first place.
And that takes us straight back to the breach of peace, i.e., show me any harm that I've done, any harm I intended, or any harm reasonably foreseeable. That's what we should be fighting. Not I'm a person, or I'm a living man, or I'm a birth certificate, the judge is this, they're all corrupt, blah, blah. We're asking the court the wrong question. So that's what the council tax is, what we're doing. What makes you think you can charge me council tax?
So how do we do that then? Because that's I think that the thing that's really standing out for me is to actually use the word they believe, the words they believe.
Absolutely.
Which then everybody, we are taught that the law is the law. And it's just the way it is. It's a fact. It's a fait accompli. It's done. And, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is, which is really, I think, very, very important, is that the law itself is based on a belief. And
no, you need to distinguish. Just go back to what I said. In 1610, they identified three sources of law: common law, custom, and statute law. Statute law is created by Parliament. Parliament believes it can impose its will on the people. Okay.
And it has to be belief because the whole thing goes right back to the belief in the divine right of kings.
And absolutely. And there's a famous speech, well, not that famous. People should read it. It's up on our website. In 1610, where King James, or whichever king was there at the time, actually argued the divine right of kings. Basically, I can do what the hell I like, and nobody can stop me. And you like it or not, only God, okay, will punish me. And God himself says in the Bible that, you know, kings are his gods on earth and whatever. Okay. However, there was a lot of turmoil and discontentment in the 1600s, the revolutions, the Civil War, etc., which ended with the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights created the constitutional principle of the separation of powers and the rule of law in order to try and balance and control the tyranny of monarchs. So that was 1688. And basically, today we have tyranny of Parliament. Parliament thinks it can do what it likes. And we've forgotten this lesson in history as to what happened in the 1600s. And it's an incredible document. There is no question that the people are the source of power, and it's purely a belief system of parliamentary sovereignty. This again was explained because I've asked people numerous times, I've asked judges, what makes you think Parliament can tell us what to do? And basically, it's the courts which have created the belief that Parliament is sovereign. And by the word sovereign, they are talking about supreme lawmaker. It's not borne out in fact. When you look at the documents, when you look at the evidence, Parliament is not sovereign. Their job is very clearly set out in the Bill of Rights and the Coronation Oath Act. And this belief is the problem. And the court justifies the belief, and I said in the Bill of Rights, it talks about it created the separation of powers, i.e., it removed from the royal prerogative the right to legislate and moved that to Parliament. The promise is we will use legislation, statutory instruments, to make sure that the monarch governs the people according to their respective laws and customs. That's the pure and only function of Parliament, to make sure when their government or the tyranny of the monarch is not delivering what is promised, because a promise is a contract. I promise to govern the people according to their respective laws and customs. And the substance is in the Coronation Oath Act, using statutes in Parliament agreed upon. So okay. Parliament is clear. The independent judiciary is the second branch, and the third branch is the executive. How do we know the monarch is the head of everyone? He's the crown in Parliament. Parliament can do nothing without the royal prerogative. His Majesty's government and His Majesty's Court and Tribunal Service, and in 1610, it was absolutely agreed royal prerogative is subject to the law of the land, which is the common law, which means we tell them what to do, they don't tell us what to do.
We seem to be a very long way from that, Mark. We seem to be a very long way from that. I think listening to you, it's very interesting because everything comes down to belief.
Yeah.
And if we go back and we
Mm.
think about this notion of the divine right of kings, which seems a very quaint medieval practice
Mhm.
in modern mind, it is at the crux of it because
Correct.
it's so important we understand that all of this is about belief,
Yeah.
because that, although it appears to be that that was the prevailing belief at the time,
I wouldn't say it was prevailing. It was de
exact
facto. It was enforced.
it was enforced. But in the sense, prevailing in the sense that
Mm.
that seemed to be the main mindset. It is, if we go back further, there were other views, and if people care to do something as obscure as look at, the Hermeticism, and
Correct.
you can see the debate that was going on there about,
And that's thousands of years ago.
it's thousands of years ago. But it is the basis of many a religion, and
Yeah.
it is the basis of law to a certain extent,
Yeah.
because at the heart of it is this question: who has the right to have a direct link to God? And and some argued that actually it's everybody. Others would argue that it's through the priest, and the priest is the ruler, and so we have a papacy, and so we have, and this all stems from that. And people really need to understand that de facto it might have been, and
Yeah.
it might still be to a certain extent, but actually it's still just a belief.
It's absolutely. And don't forget what we believe we create.
Indeed. So this is very interesting, because we can talk about the statutes, and we
Mm.
can talk about the fact that things seem to be somewhat upside down at the moment, because if I understand you correctly, Parliament is meant to be there to make sure that the king doesn't overstep the mark, and they're meant to be enforcing the the will of the people to keep the king in check, if we put it that way. Instead of which, it's turned the tables on us.
Yeah. I mean, basically, okay, the courts justify not trampling on Parliament's toes by saying they democratically elected and that they create their right, as opposed to us in the courts who are not democratically elected. Okay, that's the foundation of what they're saying and their justification for it. However, that's false. The primary constitutional principle is the rule of law. Secondary to that is the separation of powers. What that means is the legislative body is subject to the rule of law, the executive is subject to the rule of law, and so is the judiciary. And what's happened again, okay, is very clever marketing. Parliament's pushing of this is really, judges, they're not elected, therefore they have no right to make law. However, all three bodies are subject to the rule of law, and you and I create the rule of law by applying logic and reason to evidence based on our conscience.
So, this, if I'm understanding correctly,
Mm.
why it's you're meant to have a jury, because the jury is determining whether the law is being applied equitably. So it's not the judge, it's the people. So it comes right back to the people, doesn't it?
Okay. Recently, there was a jury trial where the prosecution even said not guilty, and the jury still found the guy guilty. Okay. That's the problem with juries. You don't know what side of bed they get out of. You don't know what their reason for, giving a verdict. And that is very irrational. That's the beauty of judge-made law. Because if they do not provide rational reasoning, i.e. an explanation as to how they came to their determination, it's unlawful. A jury you can't challenge. Now, recently I was involved in a jury case in Birmingham, and within this social group, one juror actually he'd met the accused, but he, you know, occasionally sort of meet, but it's the same social group. So the social group knew that this guy was a juror, and basically they had a hung jury. 9 felt that he was guilty and 3 felt he wasn't guilty. And he turned around and said they capitulated because it turned into a matter of, I'm not staying here for another day. i.e., what actually, was any harm caused? What rationality? What reasoning? Zero. It was purely because one person dug their heels in and said, until you guys find him guilty, I mean, sorry, the 3 that found not guilty, one of them basically said, I've had enough of this. We've been here for, I don't know, 10 days at the time. Okay, he's guilty. That was his reasoning. And that's how the majority got the minority to change their view. Yet, this is fundamental. And this here is quite common with jury trials. But the real problem is there's no rationality. A jury is no different to democracy. It's mob rule. Okay, democracy is purely mob rule because they believe that the mob has the right to impose their will on the rest. So basically, the majority can impose their will on the minority. So, and the problem with that is, if nobody can impose their will on anybody else, in truth, it's totally irrational what we're doing.
Okay, so we need to back up here because it feels like we've gone into a circle for which there is no remedy for the problems that we're currently facing. So just coming back then, if we're looking at the law being common law for the protection of the people, so it would seem then that, as you said, the law is created by us as individuals according to what we will or will not accept. Is that correct?
No. Okay. Just be careful. You don't. Most people will tolerate and accept stuff because they invoke the brain. Okay. And that's how they justify unacceptable things. It must go back to conscience. And the conscience dictates right from wrong. That's the question that needs to be answered. That's the function of a judge or a jury. Is it right or wrong what this person has done? So what's wrong with speeding? Police do it. What's wrong with going through red lights? Police, ambulances, they all do it. So fundamentally, in law, it's not wrong to speed or to go through red lights. So red lights is a good example to show the difference here. What happens is people are trained, flashing lights, sirens, okay, make way, emergency services. I might be one that needs it one day. And so they will pull over, but the emergency service will slow down, it will check, and then it will cross, i.e. they're following the due diligence before they cross that they don't do harm knowingly. Okay. So lawfully, there's nothing wrong with going through red lights. And there are many countries in the world where you can go through red lights. I mean, what's rational about 3 o'clock in the morning if you can see a mile down the road this way, a mile down the road that way, a mile in front and a mile behind, and there's a bloody red light and you're just sitting there. The red light's ruling your life. How insane is that? Okay. However, it's illegal, i.e., they believe they can fine you. However, again, equity is in the legislation, and they updated the Sentencing Act in 2020. One of the jobs of the judge is to sentence according to actual harm, intended harm, or reasonably foreseeable harm. So 3 questions we need to ask for speeding tickets or any of this. Where's the evidence of actual harm that's been caused? Where's the evidence of intended harm? Where's the evidence of reasonably foreseeable harm? If they can't evidence any of that, they cannot fine you, which is the way it should be.
So okay, so we're coming back to those principles, and we're coming back to the heart of natural law.
Yeah.
And so this is the test by which all should be measured.
Correct.
Whether it's coming from the people, so as to avoid what you've described, which is mob rule, whether it's parliament, whether it's the judges, whether it's the king, we're all meant to kind of be working together, really,
Correct. Yeah.
to ensure equity for absolutely everyone. And at the moment, it seems that those who are meant to be, shall we call them the guardians of law,
Yeah.
or the protectors of the people,
Feels
have
right. Yeah.
turned things so that there's an imbalance in power, but that on the side of the people, there seems to be, and I think you used the word indolence, and what was the other one you used? Ignorance.
Well, yes, ignorance is the problem. Well, other than people will do as little as possible for as much as possible.
Which then
Ignorance is the problem.
allows for this most unequal state of affairs.
Yeah.
So it's incumbent upon each and every one of us to stand up and test everything by asking those very important questions. So
Yeah.
this
I mean, this is a big problem in the courts. Okay. If you ask the wrong question, you get the wrong answer. They'll only answer what they asked. And so people get really pissed off. So if you're asking about a birth certificate and you still get a speeding ticket or whatever, okay, you're asking the wrong question. Or you should really be able to work it out. The person actually is irrelevant. They're still going to give me a speeding ticket. I'm asking the wrong question. But basically, with the Sentencing Act 2020, we've reduced 2 COVID fines, well, more than 2. One from £2,000 to £200. We've had £15,000 knocked off another one. We've had a 10,000, this not checking into a hotel thing withdrawn. But it was clear we were telling the courts about the Sentencing Act 2020, Section 63. And the problem is, basically, there's just under 5,000 statutes and just under 100,000 statutory instruments, secondary legislation. Nobody can even read this stuff in a lifetime, let alone comprehend it or anything, which is why we need to get back to the principles underlying them. So essentially what's happening is the fractal universe, okay, is working on multiple timescales. So it's very, very clear in the courts, basically, the elder people don't know the new legislation. So literally, you got to either we've got to force them to get current because the system does not retrain them and make them current. So we brought to the courts Sentencing Act 2020, and this was 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Yet there's no mechanism in place to ensure that the judiciary, the judicial officers, I mean the judges, as well as the solicitors, barristers, legal professionals, they are not up to date.
That seems very odd, given that in most other professions that I'm thinking of, it you are required to continue professional development
Yep.
throughout your career in order
Absolutely.
to continue to work.
Yeah. And this is the way, this is so clear. Uh, you know, we've put in appeals. You can appeal a conviction without a sentence. Where we've been dealing with youngsters, they agree with us. However, the old judges are throwing it out and saying you can't do it. You know, it's a generational change going on here. But essentially, they are so outdated. Most of the judiciary and the lawyers and the barristers and the King's councils, it's just horribly out of date. But that's because we've allowed that to happen.
Good. Well, I think that you have presented us with the most compelling arguments I could have thought of for everyone to be signing up for your Peacekeepers course, because it it is a reminder that it is up to us, that and
We
therefore
individually are creators. We need to understand that. And that's based on our belief system.
and so that is another aspect of our conversation that I think is very important for people to take away and understand that everything is founded on belief, and that we need to really question the belief that we have no power and
Absolutely.
start to think about how we can go about
Mm.
making ensuring that there is equity in our world.
Absolutely. It's coming. You'll see it in 10 years.
In 10 years, we could use it tomorrow, today, in fact, Mark.
Well, the thing is, that's the fractal, the ripple effect. It's now 2 years since we've started the council tax challenge. We've got about a dozen people now that get it. Another 2 years, that's going to be over 100. And in another 2 years, it's going to be over 1,000. That's enough. You don't need, people think that you need 50% and you need so many millions of people. You don't. It takes a few good people to do nothing for tyranny to prevail. Therefore, it takes a few people to do something for it to fail.
And that brings me to my next question. How do people find your Peacekeepers course?
A lot of people, okay, people that have been down rabbit holes, okay, all of a sudden things start to make sense. What the rabbit holes were saying just is irrational. And so they start to make sense. On the whole, the feedback's very good. People are welcome. Everything's got comments there. And a lot of people, you get different types of people. Most people are looking for instant solutions to a particular problem they face today. That's not what the Peacekeepers is about. It's about finding the fundamentals and understanding how to apply the fundamentals to that particular problem. So on the whole, the feedback that we get is it's clear, it's simple, and very, very positive feedback. People are very, very grateful. But I'm very, very lucky. Society's allowed me to get to the position I'm in now. And I'm in a position where really I can give back. And I need to give back because this ain't the world that I want my grandkids and them to live in. So if it's not going to be us that changes it, who's it going to be? When's it going to be? You go back in time, you mentioned the Hermetica and Hermeticism. The Romans and Greeks were arguing about this thousands of years. On the one hand of the pendulum, okay, everything's a pendulum. It goes from one extreme to the other. Everything's energy. It goes in cycles. On the one hand, you've got the belief of self-governance, which is the true meaning of anarchy. It means I govern myself not to cause another harm. It doesn't mean that there's no rules or laws. To the other side, everybody's incompetent and, somebody needs to tell them what to do. It's an age-old argument. There's nothing new in this. And the truth is what will prevail. And if you look over time, we've moved over the last 6,000 years, and we are moving into a new era. I don't know if you've heard about the long year, Kali Yuga, and all of that. This is in the Sanskrit text, which is the oldest written texts we have. They talk about a 26,000-year cycle. Most people are familiar with the astrological cycle over 1 year. Most people are familiar with day and night cycles, the tides, so many seasons. They were talking about a 3.2 billion year cycle, and that's 8,000 years ago. The precession of the equinoxes is the long year. And even though it was written 8,000 years ago, we could only observe it 120 odd years ago, whatever, early 1900s. So, and what that's saying is we're coming out of the dark ages and we're building the foundations for the next 13,000 years into the next golden ages. So if you look at the political cycles, those are generally 300 odd years. 1700 is basically all the revolutionary years. And it culminated with the US Constitution. It started with the Bill of Rights and the French version of it. And basically, the US Declaration of Independence says, or the Constitution, we the people, self-evident truths. However, it's the small print. Unless you were black or slave, unless you were a woman, unless you were this, unless you were that. We've taken 300 years to sort this nonsense in the detail out. But that there, we first have a thought that needs to be spoken and written. That then needs to be manifested into the material realm. That's what takes time. So it's taken us 300 years of discrimination law or anti-discrimination law to get to the point of what was expressed finally in the US Declaration, self-evident truths. We, the people, all are equal under the law. Nobody's above the law. So that there is, again, we need to work out the detail. Thought comes first, speech or expression, then manifesting into the material. And what we've got now is the internet. Everything is always two sides of the same coin. You get the fear mongers that the internet that's what they're using to control us. Guess what the opposite is? That's what's going to set us free. And this is what we're finding now. Because more and more people are starting to read legislation and case law, there are so many anomalies, so many contradictions. All of this needs sorting out. And there's more of us than them. I think you know the answer to that one. That's why I say 10 years, that's it.
So
10 years.
So let's see if we can speed things up and get people doing your course. How do they go about finding you?
It's peacekeepers.org.uk, all one word, all small letters. You simply need to sign up. It would be useful if we had your postcode, because we've got postcode groups where people can go and meet like-minded people relatively locally. It's really the first three letters of the postcode, because I'm not interested in people's data. And if anybody hacks the system, they're not going to be able to get hold of anybody anyway, because there's no address, or you just put up what you want. And really, at the end of the day, set aside a Saturday, preferably look at the forecast if it's a rainy Saturday. In the morning, keep your pajamas on, get in front of the computer, have your cup of coffee and tea, and in a daytime, you will be able to get through each of the courses within 8 hours. And what you'll find is when you go through it again and again, more and more will be there. Every time you open a book, you will find something different from last time. And the reason for that is we always come into something that's subconscious biased. We have an issue generally which would pull somebody to come to the Peacekeepers course. And then once we see those things, those are resolved. And the next level of subconscious comes up, and next comes up, and next comes up. So it's a evolutionary, iterative process. And then we've got weekly Peacekeeper meetings on Thursday evenings. And then the Peacekeeper groups itself, it's a loose, it's not an organized structure, it's grassroots. People sort out themselves what they do. You know, if they want to arrange going through the course as a group on a Saturday morning, or going to court, and a lot of people are starting that now. 3 or 4 of them are going to court every month, just sit in the public gallery and watch. To actually having people in uniforms patrolling, and down in Cornwall, that's what they've chosen to do with it. And they are making a very big impact with what they're doing. So really, it's up to people to do with what they want.
Wonderful.
It's no, take what you want, leave the rest, really.
Fantastic. Well, I think it is all about empowering ourselves and understanding the system in which we have been living.
Yeah.
And for those who want to exit the system, that's great too. We still need to know how the system works, because it's not, you may want to exit, but it doesn't want you to exit. So you still have to understand at least.
Yeah, that's the self-interest.
Yeah. So it's self-interest, but it's also the means by which we together can begin to challenge these
Absolutely.
assumptions and beliefs that are being used really in a very tyrannical way. So, Marc, thank you very much for everything that you've done and for your time today.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you for your time.
And thank
You for what you do.
Well, it's always a pleasure when I'm talking to such wonderful people all the time. So thank you all for watching, and until next time, goodbye.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, everyone.